Welcome, one and all, to the Friday, May 26th edition of Signals from Mars. We are back for a live show this month, and joining me are a bunch of my patrons to discuss 1985. We have Metal Dan in California. We have Jeremy in the UK. Johan in Sweden. And we have Ed Ferguson in Kentucky. How is everyone tonight?
Great.
Yeah, great.
Very good. Thank you. Very good.
Intro very reminiscent of the old Hollywood Squares show. You know, I feel like I have to mention what shows or what movies you guys have been in lately. But anyway, always a fun night to catch up with the patrons and talk some music. And tonight is no different. We're going to be talking about 1985, the year that was. This list, 51 albums were voted on. So I think 84, we got up to 40, I think it was 40 something. So there's a few more here. We're all over the place. We've got some rock albums. We've got some pop albums. We've got some various artists' soundtracks as well. So what we're going to do is real quickly here, I'm going to go 51 through 15, and then we'll go slowly from there through the top 15. Well, more like top 10. But anyway, if there's any of these that stand out to you guys, just let me know. For those that are watching or listening, the voting basically happens in the following fashion. Everyone submits a list to me. Whatever their number one album is gets 10 points. Number two gets 9 points, all the way down to 10, which gets 1 point. And then I tally the points up to get this list. The more an album is voted on, the higher it's going to appear. So if it's voted on by a bunch of people, it's going to appear higher. There are some albums on here that were someone's number one, but they were only voted on by that person, so they didn't get as high as maybe. Don't point at yourself, Dan. But yeah, this happens every time, and there's the. I still remember. I think it was the thrash show we did, where Johan got upset because Creator was so far down, and Ed, you'll be surprised. But anyway, Johan complained that Creator was so far down, but then we have to realize the weight of the other things that come before here. And all of these albums are cool. There are albums that I voted on that aren't even I'm looking here real quickly. There's a few of mine that aren't even in the top 20, but this is just another cool way of turning people on to music or making you revisit albums that maybe you haven't checked out in a while. So without further ado, and without me yammering away, let's see. Let's start it up here. 51, Honeymoon Suite with Big Prize. 50, Exodus, Bonded by Blood. 49, various artists, the Goonies soundtrack. 48, Phenomena, self-titled album Phenomena. 47, this was an album that I listened to a lot, and for as much as what people, and I didn't vote for this, but for as much as people may consider them more of a pop act, they put out some pretty good albums before the band came to an end, in my opinion. 47, In Excess with Listen Like Thieves. 46, another Various Artists, the wrestling album. 45, Leatherwolf, Endangered Species. 44, Weird Al Yankovic. This is a big one around my house right now. Dare to Be Stupid. My kids play.
Yeah! Absolutely. I wanted to put it in there, man. I didn't have room. It's kind of good. You go back. I know I wasn't listening to it in '85. I grew to respect it later in life, and go see Weird Al live, and it's fun.
Did you like the movie, Dan?
Oh, I don't remember it, or UHF for that matter. I didn't find Al really. I knew about him, but I didn't respect until later in life.
Okay.
Grew
Did
to
you see
love
the
him.
recent movie?
No, I don't have that channel thing, and I haven't done
Roku.
the
Yeah.
legal thing.
Yeah. Okay. 43, Black and Blue Without Love. 42, Mr. Mister, Welcome to the Real World. 41, King Cobra with Ready to Strike. And at 40, Grim Reaper with Fear No Evil. All right. Any comments with those albums? Anyone?
Yeah. Johan here like to make a comment. Is it so? This is all the albums of 1985.
These are all the albums that were voted on by people.
Yeah, but is there any rules for? Because I I consider this as a kind of a metal show, but you can vote on pop albums as well.
Well, I would prefer people to vote on hard rock and metal albums. But if people are voting on these albums, they're taking the time to vote on them. I'm not. There have been a few over time that have been kind of out there that I've said, yeah, I'm not including that. But there have been other ones that that I've let go. I think in this time period, at least in the U.S., MTV and radio still hadn't kind of divided a lot of things, so you could hear a lot of the same music on the same radio stations.
Yep.
So, but I understand what you're saying. I mean, maybe one day we'll revisit a lot of these years and vote on albums that weren't, hard rock or metal, and see what kind of an eclectic mix we get. Real quickly here in the chat, we have Bill Elam. Hello, Bill. And we also have Tony in Barcelona. Bill is saying, Metal Dan, you can watch the Weird Al movie at no device needed. No. Oh, okay. So he's saying there's an address. I'm not going to say it. I don't want YouTube yanking this show, but go ahead, Dan. What were you going to say?
Yeah, King Cobra. I wanted to kind of fit that into. At the time when that came out, it was kind of a big album for a little album. It was something new with Carmine and these four blondes, and it had a sound that was kind of going in that direction of the metal Sunset Strip, but it was different.
Mhm.
And we used to listen to that album over and over. So much respect to that King Cobra album.
Okay, cool. All right, so moving on here. You guys are going to love this combination. So here's one that a few people voted on, but again, because it was lower on people's lists, it appears here. The interesting is that when we did the Sunset Strip list, one of the people that voted for this album as their number one. So 39, Warrior with Fighting for the Earth. 38, Possessed, Seven Churches. Now, you guys will love this transition. It goes from Possessed to Kate Bush and Hounds of Love.
Oh, my goodness. Kate Bush beat Possessed.
There you go. 36, Blue Oyster Cult, Club Ninja. 35, another one that got voted several times, but again, lower on people's lists. Loudness with Thunder in the East. 34, Keel, Right to Rock. 33, an album I voted on, Halloween, Walls of Jericho. 32, Dirty Rotten Imbeciles, better known as DRI, Dealing with It. 31, Alcatraz, Disturbing the Peace. And 30, an album that I figured would have been voted higher, Saxon with Innocence is No Excuse. At 30, I think that's the lowest the Saxon album has placed in any of our lists. So, Jeremy, do you have anything to say about that album?
Yeah, because it wasn't one that I actually voted for because I don't think it's one of their better albums. To be honest, I think it's probably one of their, I wouldn't say it's their worst album, but I just think it's a bit more poppy, commercial, and not not hard hitting as Wheels of Steel and Strong Arm and Denim and Leather. So to me, it's not a surprise that it's low down. It's not one of the best in their career.
It's interesting because I was looking up albums to see if there's anything that I had missed. And I was thinking, okay, I have to figure that there's a Fastaway album that was released that year. And I looked at it and it was Waiting for the Roar. And I'm like, yeah, that's like the worst album they released under the Dave King era, because just like you said, there's synthesizers, there's electronic drums, there's just a lot of nonsense going on. I'm like, yeah, that there's a song or two on there that I really like, but as a whole album, it wouldn't even be in my top 20 for the year, Dan, go ahead.
With the Saxon album, I'm glad it came up as a point. What strikes about that album is the album cover. As a kid in '85, that one was a good one to look at. I know I'm socially inappropriate in 2023, but I'm a Gen whatever, and I can say. So with those songs, I mean, Back on the Streets and Rock and Roll Gypsy, it's not a complete album. It has some problems, but it has some songs, and that's why it doesn't make it in the top 15.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So at 29, Savatage with Power of the Night. 28, one that Johan loves. 2 people voted on this album. Icon, Night of the Crime. 27, David Lee Roth, Crazy from the Heat. 26, Slayer with Hell Awaits. 25, Simple Minds, Once Upon a Time. 24, Magnum, On a Storyteller's Night. 23, Lizzie Borden, Love You to Pieces.
Oh.
22, one that I voted for. Armored Saint, Delirious Nomad. 21, self-titled debut by Rough Cut. And at 20, Marillion, Misplaced Childhood. Dan,
I think Dan has some commentary to offer.
You guys, hey Johan, I'm gonna use a little Johan. You guys are all dumb. You don't know what you're talking about. This is bad. My bracket's busted. I mean, Lizzie Borden, it's anthems. It's American metal. It's hit after hit. It's a perfect album. I had it at number 2. My bracket's gone. Rough Cut's gone. Armored Saint, at least it made it. So that's all I gotta say. I'm curious about Magnum though. Not familiar with really them in the United States.
Right. And that's interesting. This is something that we always talk about. How depending on where you grew up in the world, different bands are bigger or not. Lizzie Borden, for example, for me, we saw it in all the magazines. We saw the we saw the ads and stuff, but it wasn't in the stores. You couldn't find it on the East Coast. I don't remember them playing Lizzie Borden until years later on the radio. It was almost like after. And it's similar to what we had talked about Icon another time. Like when Icon released something in the 90s, or not the 90s, late 80s, it was like, oh, Icon is back and this and that. And they were talking it up like it was a big thing. And I was like, I've never heard of this band. So they were big in Sweden. They were big in California and, in the parts of, on the West Coast. But in the East Coast, we had no idea who Icon was. So I think with Lizzie Borden, it's kind of the same thing, Magnum is a band that in the UK and in Europe, coming over as a kid, I remember seeing Magnum in all the magazines. They were the only band that had a guy with a beard in the band. And I remember thinking, that's not metal. Is he want to be like one of the ZZ Top guys? And then all these years later, how many of these same people have substituted having long hair with having long beards? So Jeremy, what do you want to say about Magnum?
Yeah, I mean they became very, very famous around the sort of mid '80s, and this particular album is the fans' favorite, but it's not necessarily the band's favorite. But it is a great album, and recently they played it all the way through, obviously on an anniversary tour, or quite a few years back now. And they're a band from Birmingham. They got into the charts. I think they eventually ended up getting sort of top 5 albums in the normal charts. So they were shifting a lot of albums, and they headlined Hammersmith Odeon twice, and so they were getting quite popular. Wow. And then they sort of faded away again and just became a fans band.
Are they still out there?
Yeah, they're still playing. They've got 2 of the original members. They've got Bob Catley, the singer, so the voice is always the same. And they've got Tony Clarkin, the guitarist that Victor mentioned. And he actually has written almost every song that Magnum have done, apart from, I think, a Russ Ballard song and one other. And he writes all the lyrics as well. Bob Catley's never written a lyric for Magnum ever.
Oh, wow. So he's the Ozzy of the band.
Yeah, he's probably earning a lot of money from it.
Yeah. What was I going to mention? I lost my train of thought there. Oh, I know. They released an album earlier this year. Or was it last year that they released a new album?
Yeah, and that was probably the worst one I've ever heard by them. So I think they're starting to produce far too many. But the 80s and early 90s stuff I really liked, and they brought out some really good albums then. But obviously they're old geezers now, and they're just sort of churning it out a bit.
What album would you recommend to Dan if he wants to check the band out? What's the one that'll?
Yeah, well, I would suggest this one on A Storyteller's Night, because it contains a lot of different types of songs on there. It's got the sort of poppy ones, the commercial stuff, and it's got one sort of long one that opens it up, How Far Jerusalem, which is a really good song. And then if you like that, just go in and dig into some of the others. Really, they've got a lot of albums. Oh, you don't have to like all of the albums, but you might like some of the songs.
All right. Yeah, I don't even see them in my list of 85 albums, but I found on A Storyteller's Night, so I'm gonna check it out. There it is, 85. I don't know why I didn't make it in.
Go ahead, Johan.
Yeah, question for Jeremy. The album that came up after A Storyteller's Night, Vigilante, is one of my favorite albums.
Yeah, that was produced by Roger Taylor, Queen. So it had a very, very different production to it, and it does have some really good songs on there. Yeah.
How was it received back then?
Really well, but I think some of the core Magnum fans thought it was a little bit overproduced at the time, and the band themselves, I don't know, I think they lost a lot of money at the time, and so I think they didn't want to go down the route of paying, for top class production like that, and they did a little bit of production themselves. But anyway, it's we're not here just to talk about Magnum, but that's the Vigilante was a good album, I thought.
Yeah, for me, On A Storyteller's Night and Vigilante is 2 10 out of 10 albums. So 2 perfect albums.
Yeah, wow. I think they're 2 of the best. Yeah.
Appreciate it. I'm gonna check it out this weekend, you guys. Thanks.
Awesome. So joining us from Ireland, the Irish representative of the show, Anthony Mackie. How are you tonight?
Good. I'm late.
Fine. You made it. That's what counts.
That's it.
All right. So at 19, and by the way, at 20 was Marillion Misplaced Childhood.
20. Come on, lads.
Not a U.S. thing on that one, Marillion at all. Go ahead, Johan. Yeah,
I mean that album doesn't come into this chart for me. It's not a metal or hard rock album, but sure. It's one of my best albums of my life. Misplaced Childhood is, if you haven't heard it, it's one of the most perfect albums ever made. So, but I didn't include it in my list because it's not this genre, but hey.
Yeah.
So you're to blame, Johan. Is that what you're saying?
This guy too.
No, like, yeah, okay. So that's okay.
That's fine. Like I said, and I mean, with a lot of these things, there's a fine line between them. But like I said, if someone is gracious enough to vote for something, I'm going to include it. So
I think I know where the top 10's going, but the thing I'm looking forward to is we get this inspiration or this idea from the stupid Rolling Stone magazine that'll have the greatest metal riffs of all time or the greatest whatever, and it'll be like, doesn't make sense. And here's these minds coming together saying, no, that's not the greatest. This is what it is. So that's why most of the time this team gets it right.
there you go.
Most of the time.
Well, yeah.
I'm joking.
And that is and as Dan says this, cue Dan's next freak out. At 19, Kicks Midnight Dynamite.
Whatever.
All right. 18, Twisted Sister, Come Out and Play.
Oh, come on. But it's not. I mean, that was one of the most anticipated albums. After the hugest release of Twisted Sister. Agreed. I bought it thinking this is going to be everything that I needed in life. And then the first song it opens up and it's okay. Come Out and Play. It's beautiful. And then it went to shit. And then you had that stupid, which is a song that they covered back in the day in the clubs, which is fine. But when they recorded on the album, it sucked. And then the album, it's not one of their best. It does not deserve to be a top 20.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, what was the follow-up single? Be Cruel to Your School, which also was another crap song. I mean, had they have led with The Fire Still Burns, I mean, the album would be looked at in a completely different light.
D looks back at it and goes, we'd made a mistake too. So even he admits in the long term, it wasn't the best idea. And they were having internal fighting, and D was having his own struggles with stardom.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's when he filed his teeth down. That's after the PMRC thing. That's, I mean, as he told me, I had 5 Ferraris and 5 houses and a wife and the kids, and, you know, that was all that mattered. He didn't give a shit. And you were talking about the guys from Magnum. If you look at Twisted Sister songwriting credits, Dee Snider's on every single one of them. So up until the last album. All right. 17, Y&T, Down for the Count. 16, an album that Ed has behind him on the wall. Stormtroopers of Death, SOD with Speak English or Die. Number 15, one that I voted for, Misfits, Legacy of Brutality. Great song after song on that, in my opinion. 14, Kiss with the much maligned Asylum. 13, Rush, Power Windows. All right, thumbs up from Johan.
Acceptable position, Johan.
All right. 12, Overkill with Feel the Fire. I honestly did not expect this album to place this high. A lot of people voted for this album. So what
I have to say about that, and I don't want to keep control of the show. I want everybody else to speak too, but the songs on this album are ones that they play today. So they've stayed the test of time. The problem with the album, in my opinion, is it just doesn't have the right engineering and production behind it to make it go even better. They just need to re-record it, I think, and that would be really cool and resell it.
Yeah, I was listening to it today as well, and it's funny because that's one of the things and that they've gotten really right with the last few albums is sonically, they sound great, but they took over producing their own stuff. So there are some bands that don't know how to do that right, and fortunately they do.
You know, that's one band I could totally handle them re-recording their first few records.
Yeah.
That would sound awesome. That's a good suggestion, Dan. I hadn't thought of that.
I think, they would be similar to Testament. Testament re-recorded a lot of those first 2 albums because they hated the sound. And that was the thing that, again, Chuck Billy said when I asked him about it. He said, I listened back to my contemporaries at the time. Their albums still sound good. Ours sound like shit. We didn't want this producer. It was forced upon us. And the albums don't sound the way that we sound live. And that's why they went back and re-recorded them. And they said, this is what these sounds have always sounded like live. But Metal Force, or Megaforce, excuse me, wanted, who did it? Alex Perialis, I think, did those albums, if I'm not mistaken. And it wasn't what they wanted. So, 11. This was an album that was in and out of the top 10. And I will say that it's out of the top 10 by only 2 points. It is Wasp with The Last Command. So, we are now getting into the top 10 here. For those joining us late, 51 albums were voted on overall. As usual, the top 6 are pretty grouped together. There's a difference of 14 points. So it isn't a runaway like we've had with other lists where the number 1 had 20 some odd points over everything else. It was pretty even, and those 6 at one point or another were number 1 while I was tallying the points. So, and there's actually, and I would say the top 8 at one point were 1. But that isn't how it has shaken out. All right, so at number 10 is where we start with the album covers. Fly on the Wall by AC/DC.
I knew it.
An album, again, that I didn't know if it was going to be anywhere near the top 10 because it's usually towards the bottom of people's lists when it comes to AC/DC albums. For people that always say, oh, they've never changed their sound. You forget about Fly on the Wall because that's very 80s produced. Angus has a Floyd Rose in his SG. His hair is full of Aquanet as well in the 2 videos for this album. So AC/DC was trying to play with what was popular at the time. Anyone want to comment on this album?
Sure. I thought it could be at least number 2 or number 14. It's hard to say. It's that kind of album. It's
right.
It's a hard one to pick by AC/DC. If it would have been any other album by them, would have been more easier. But this one is hard. I like this one, but it's different.
Right. Okay.
The commercialization of this album, I really like the. If you go out and look for AC/DC tour shirts, there's a lot from this tour, and graphically they look fantastic. So everything they did with this looks really cool. But the songs, some of the songs are there, but it just doesn't sound like the right AC/DC album. Fly on the Wall, Shake Your Foundations was a great video, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all saw that with the shooting pool. And that was Sink the Pink.
Sink the Pink, yeah.
Yeah. So there's some good songs, but it just doesn't have typical AC/DC enough.
And now,
I was at that. I was 15 when that came out, and I was a total AC/DC freak. Just spent thousands of hours listening to AC/DC in my room, and I was disappointed when this record came out.
Yeah,
for all the reasons that you said. All that reverb and such that they had just kind of took away some of the hard rock feeling that it used to have. But at the same time, they started doing those kind of comical videos.
Right.
MTV was getting into more and more homes. And this was, I think, a summer release. So I kind of remember my 15, the summer of being 15. I remember this being a part of that soundtrack. And it's kind of grown on me over the years. Kind of like there was a lot of records, in '85 that started to become, more rhythm and bluesy, less hard rock.
Mhm.
A lot of the reverb, keyboards, getting into things here and there. But because they were a part of those summers that we lived as teenagers,
Right.
we were still listening to those songs. And we kind of grew up with some of that stuff to the point where they're still with us.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I listened to Fly on the Wall just the other day
Cool.
and enjoyed it.
Yeah, I remember that the video for this, I think, was one of the first videos I'd ever seen where there was animation in the videos. It was a mix of
Mhm.
live footage with the animation as well, which I remember as a kid was really unique and different. And then, of course, because Who Made Who came out right after this, if I'm not mistaken.
In '86.
Yeah,
Too quickly.
right. And that's what I was going to say. It was almost like Who Made Who kind of buried this. Like, you heard the song Who Made Who everywhere. I mean, it was all over TV, it was all over the radio, and it was like they released that instantly because of maybe a potential backlash from fans. So
That was also with the movie, though, too.
right.
Maximum Overdrive.
Yeah.
Which that was exciting when that came out. And I mean, it's a stupid movie, but it's still fun to watch every once in a while because it's got your AC/DC in there.
Yeah, that's their it's funny. They're the only band that's never released a greatest hits, but it turns out that their greatest hits are 2 movie soundtracks. The Who Made Who, which is Maximum Overdrive, and the first Iron Man soundtrack is also all AC/DC. So
I can't.
And I love
that
that.
movie either.
An AC/DC greatest hits wouldn't have Who Made Who on it if I was making
well,
it.
there you go.
Yeah, and I love that Stephen King is a fan of AC/DC, and that's the reason why he got to pick the band.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, at number 9, did not expect this at all. At all. The band itself does not like this album. A band from my fucking home state. Bon Jovi, 7,800 Degrees Fahrenheit.
Well,
How'd this creep in there?
Johan, go to Johan first.
Did Johan vote for this?
Yeah.
I think I did. Yeah, I voted for this. And I voted for the song Tokyo Road. No, I didn't, but I thought I thought I wanted to
No,
do it.
you didn't vote for this.
No, I didn't. But I thought I was going to do. Perhaps it's at 11. It's a great album. From the time. I remember when I heard that album at the record store, when you could go down and listen to the record before you bought it.
Right.
And you heard In and Out of Love.
Yeah.
And I thought it was, wow, this is good. And then I went back and listened to it now. That's a really good 1985 record.
Right.
Great songs. The feeling is right there. I think it's a good record. I think it's one of Bon Jovi's better records. And I don't like Bon Jovi that much, but yeah, that's a good record.
Yeah.
I don't know what you guys think, but
out of all of the albums that he's released, this is probably the album that I like the most. It wouldn't make my list personally, but also it has a lot to do that he's from my area. So Bon Jovi was rammed down your throat every single day, several times a day. So by the time this came out, I mean, In and Out of Love was on the radio all the time. Runaway is still on the radio all the time. I'm trying to think, what was the big ballad off of this album as well?
Yeah, I mean,
Price of Love.
Yeah, so that was on the radio all the time, and then once Slippery When Wet came out, forget it. I mean, it was Bon Jovi all day, every day.
It
So,
was a 1-2 punch. I played this on the cassette over and over. It was all we needed at the time from Bon Jovi. It was at the right moment too,
yeah,
and the videos helped as well too with In and Out of Love. They played that stuff all the time. They were huge before the next album Slippery came out.
yeah. Well, In and Out of Love, I know exactly where they recorded that because that's on a boardwalk there on at Seaside Heights Beach in New Jersey. So, yeah, and I forget. I think they have a sign there now that says, you know, where Bon Jovi recorded a video or something to that extent. So, number 8, a band that I love, and it's funny because when I listen to them, this band is a lot like a chameleon because they've changed so much over the years, and I sometimes forget that they recorded this album. And while doing research for this, I was like, fuck, this album is good. It has to be on my list, although it isn't one of their go-to albums for me. For a lot of people, it is. It is Love by The Cult. There's a lot of good stuff on here. And, to me, Electric is one of my all-time favorite albums. It's so different to this, but it doesn't mean, that this doesn't have good stuff on it. I was looking at my my handy dandy The Cult playlist here. And I mean, Nirvana, Big Neon Glitter, Love, Rain, Hollow Man, Revolution, She Sells Sanctuary, which is the huge hit off of this. I mean, again, there's 1, 2, 3 songs that were played consistently on radio in my area off of this album. So you had Nirvana, you had Rain, and Revolution got played, and She Sells Sanctuary still gets played every single day on the radio. So, anyone else want to mention something about this album?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Really, I mean, it's a really really good album. I really like the Cults. The early stuff that they did, and they sort of morphed into more of a rocky band. But this was when they were sort of a gothic underground band, really. And but there's the songs that you pointed out were the best ones on the album, and She Sells Sanctuary. It's worth just voting just for that song, really. That's probably one of the greatest songs that they've ever done, and probably one that it's one of the great sort of rock gothic songs. I think really great song. It's really good live as well.
Yeah, so interesting how they tie. We talked about crossover bands. The Cult is really a band that crossed over with a bunch of different genres and incorporated different things and took chances where I think after Ceremony, they kind of didn't give a shit what labels or anybody else wanted because the label forced them to do Sonic Temple 2, and that didn't work out. So I think it's been cool that they've tried so many different things over the years.
There's a 4 CD re-release of this album out there. Do you have that, Victor?
I do not.
It looks loaded.
Yeah, because they have. I used to have, and of course, when I moved overseas, I had to sell a lot of the limited edition shit that I had because that's what gave you the most money in return. But I had a limited edition that was the studio album, and I think it was Live at the Marquee, which they've since released as a separate album.
Live at the Hammersmith from 85 in October.
Okay, so there's that. And then they did, I think that they grouped the songs off of Electric with this.
No, bunch of demos, but
Okay.
no mention of Electric on this, other than live and huge amount of demos for this and instrumentals and whatnot.
Yeah, because Electric, for those that don't know, sounded like Love. they ended up paying I forget who their label was, Beggar's Banquet and somebody else. They ended up owing them like $3 million because they recorded and I forget what Electric's original name was. It was a continuation of this album. They scrapped it and went back and worked with Rick Rubin and made it AC/DC sounding. Go ahead, Dan.
I didn't know that Electric is not the original name of the album. Now you're gonna have to research that and get back to me on that. You know
Yeah,
it?
I think it was.
You can buy it as well. You can buy the original.
What's it
one.
called?
I think it might actually be called Electric Ocean or,
I forgot what it's called.
or something like that.
No,
Yeah. Because that
rings
used
a
to
bell.
be.
Yeah.
I had a bootleg years ago which had it, and I remember I got my hands on it, and I was like, "This is gonna be so neat." And then you start to listen to it, you're like, "Wow, has nothing to do with how it ended up."
But that's really interesting.
Yeah, it was a big deal because labels forward money to these bands to record albums. You record a full album, you're ready to go out on tour, and you tell your label, we
It's
don't
called
like
Peace.
Peace. There you go. All right.
Peace.
I knew it tied in somewhere.
So the label didn't like Peace, and somebody said to go to Electric. It doesn't. This is the different
No.
discussion.
It was the band. The band had recorded the album. They were ready to turn it in. Label was waiting for it, and they decided. They wanted to make it a heavier album. They decided that they were into different things and wanted to do something different. So, I mean, if you really look,
Go
ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say it's got a few different tracks on it as well, and slightly different order to the songs as well. So instead of Wildflower starting, it's got Love Removal Machine as the first track and Wildflower as the second track, and then there's a couple of other ones at the end. I've probably never heard these. I'm going to have to go and listen to them.
Yeah, check it out. It's interesting because, again, we're so used to what it ended up as. It's something totally different. So, all right, that's 7. We get back to the covers here. Here we go. Sacred Heart by Dio. So this is an album for me that after Holy Diver and Last in Line, again, was something similar to what we talked about with Saxon and other bands, where you had more of the Claude Schnell effect in here. You had heavier keyboards and stuff. And I remember at the time, I was trying to think before if Hungry for Heaven or Rock and Roll Children was the first single off of this, or at least the first one that I saw on TV. And I was like, oh, okay, sounds cool, but it's not Rainbow in the Dark. It's not that heavy Smash Mouth type metal that I was used to from Dio. And I remember for me, it wasn't something that I searched out because of that. And looking back at it now, it's a good album, but we went from great to good. So to me, it's kind of a step back, in my opinion. So, but what do I know? Who else wants to talk about Sacred Heart?
I'll say you're correct. I agree with you. It definitely wasn't as exciting as the other two records, but still good enough that I've got it in my collection and listen to it sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, it's got some good songs on it, but it hasn't got an epic song either, has it? It hasn't got one of those longer tracks like sort of Egypt, Chains Are On. Hasn't got one of those, and it just didn't quite reach the heights that the previous albums did. So, I agree with you. So it's not quite as good.
Yeah, Anthony, what were you saying?
Oh, it reminds me of the feeling of when Come Out and Play came out.
Yeah,
it was these two albums were quite anticipated, and I suppose I would include Fly on the Wall in that as well. That was a lot of big albums that came out this year that were a bit of a letdown.
Right.
Albums with high expectations, I suppose.
And that's an interesting point, because again, we're talking about labels and different things. How much did the labels have to do with that? How much did the bands feel pressure to kind of compete with what was big at the time? You know, let's be honest. We were talking about 7,800 degrees Fahrenheit. That kind of set the table for a lot of what came after, with a lot of the, you know, pop side of metal for a lot of these bands with the heavy keyboards and everything. So it had to influence a lot of these bands to an extent, you know. So I think that Dio, unfortunately, was no different, because we saw that. I mean, you can't. Again, you're mentioning Egypt, but you think about, you know, We Rock, or I Speed at Night, or, you know, stuff like that. And how does that, you know, if you go from that to Hungry for Heaven or Rock and Roll Children, even, it's just a huge departure. One side sounds completely made for radio, and the other sounds like, all right, well, yeah, this is a continuation of Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, Holy Diver, Last in Line.
Mm.
So, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, the album holds a special memory in my heart. I have the album. It's signed by Jimmy Bain, who passed away not too long ago. So I met Jimmy in person at a in-store for a BC Rich guitar thing. And I was like one of the first ones in line. We got there 3 hours too early because I couldn't wait. Unfortunately, Ronnie was not there. It was just Jimmy, but I was a bass player, so it was a big deal. So
Yeah.
the songs are there for me because I lived through that, and I like Shoot Shoot. You know, Hungry for Heaven. I agree. The sound of the album is different with the keyboards. It holds a special memory, and that's It's not in my top 10, but I respect it being there.
And at the end of the day, Dan, that's all that matters. If the album means something to you, and that's the most important thing, regardless what we do on these lists or whatnot. Like you said before, we're not doing this like trolls, like Rolling Stone or these other outlets who just want to piss people off and get clicks. I mean, these are our opinions, and at the end of the day, you can agree with us or not. That's fine. It's just beautiful that you're taking time out to listen or watch this, and we're just chatting about music and talking about some cool stuff. And if you haven't heard any of these albums, go back and form your own opinion. That's totally awesome. So, 6. This is an album that was never on my radar, ever. But you guys love this album. It's obvious by how it was voted by so many people. Metal Heart by Accept. Look at that. Johan clapping. Look at that. Oh, Jeremy's showing his Metal Heart. Johan, you go first.
Oh wow, this is for me an epic album. I bought it when I was on vacation in Belgium, 1985, and it's still one of my favorite albums as we speak, as in today. It's every song is good. It's a perfect European metal album. Back in the day when they did the Mozart thing and that, it felt fresh and very German, I would say. But you know, with the choruses and the song, the mix between, they wanted to step into the US market with the songs like Midnight Mover, but they also tried to be typical European with songs like Metal Heart, or Bound to Fail. It's I love this album from my heart. So I have the only album I have, the Belgian copy of, it's Metal Heart by Accept.
Cool.
Dogs on Leads. I don't
Yeah.
know even that's about.
Yeah.
So cool. Yeah. Go.
Yeah, good, Dan. Yeah, good, great. Yeah.
The background chanting on that. Like,
Yeah.
where did that come from? Wrong is right, and they still rip that today, and it's fucking heavy.
See,
Up
this
to the limit. It's hit after hit.
Yeah,
Hmm.
totally agree. Totally agree. And I would really like to hear from you guys around the world what the popularity of Accept was back in the day.
See, that's the thing that I was going to touch upon. For us on the East Coast, Accept albums were hard to find. They were import albums. And for example, Balls to the Walls is the first album of theirs that got released massively because that song was everywhere. So that one was widely released, and then the other ones started to come out on import, and little by little they were available in the US. I remember that I didn't hear Fast as a Shark or Restless
you
and
did-
Wild. It's
You
one
didn't
of-
hear Fast as a Shark until much later, I don't think, because it didn't hit right away in the US.
Yeah.
At our age.
I heard that because I brought a compilation back, a vinyl compilation for friends of mine from here in Spain in the late 80s. Yeah, it had to be 89-ish, something like that. And we heard the one vinyl had Fast as a Shark and the other one had Restless and Wild. And we were like, what is this? You know, we had heard nothing like that. And, you know, for us, Accept was Balls to the Walls. You know, it wasn't that. And we had read, you know, they're such an influential band. They did, you know, Fast as a Shark influenced, I don't know how many thrash bands with the double bass and with this and with that. And we weren't cognizant of it. We heard that and we're like, holy shit, yeah, I get it now. This is honestly an album that I need to go and check out because of how you guys are talking about it and just how high it was voted. Like I said, this was in and out of first place. Jeremy, for you, you're literally wearing it on your sleeve.
I am, and you're not going to believe this, but I only heard it for the first time 5 years ago.
Okay, wow.
The reason is that when Accept first broke in the UK, I listened to I'm a Rebel, and I would never listen to another Accept song again for 35 years because I just didn't like them. You know, just plain and simple, just didn't like them, didn't fancy listening to much of their stuff. And it was only much later, I think I saw them on TV, I might have seen it, or I saw a video or something, and I thought, you know what, I think I really do like Accept. What have I been missing? And so I went through and listened to all their old stuff, and now they're one of my favorite bands, and it's just ridiculous. So I've missed all that time listening to them. But anyway, Metal Heart is a fantastic album. Everything that Johan says about it, got some great songs, and also it meets Metal Dan's criteria for great album cover as well. Look at that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame that the band is since not the same. They're not as together like they used to be. It's still with Steven. It's still with Peter. It's too bad. They're carrying on. They're losing a little bit of their fire. I'm glad they're still out there. But that's just, yeah. I'm fine with the singer they have now. It's too bad they can't work out the thing with Udo. But yeah, it's a great album.
And they're solid. The new albums are solid as well, aren't they? They still meet that sort of same standard on each album. There's always some great songs on each one. They're just a really solid rock band, but very just a great sort of band that anyone can get into who's into hard rock.
Yeah. As
Victor was saying, that at the time they were kind of mysterious. We didn't know about them. They were from Germany, and we only knew a little bit. And hear this heavy sound, and it was different. It was great.
Yeah.
Well, Johan, I'll say in Ireland, Accept were as big as any other metal band. Like they were as big as maybe not Maiden, but everybody knew about Accept, and like this was also a highly anticipated album. So, and it delivered, not unlike the other few.
Right.
So yeah, and this album is amazing. Like it's got, like Screaming for a Love Bite, could sit alongside your Dawkins or whatever, and as well as the heavier stuff, That's brilliant and sounds fantastic as well. Really pure sounding album.
Did you ever see them, Anthony?
I did, yeah. I
Wow.
saw them on the Russian Roulette tour.
Wow. Wow, did you?
Yeah. And come to think of it, Dokken opened. And it was Accepting Dokken. It was an amazing gig.
Which was a huge deal, Johan. When I saw them for the first time, I was so ready to see it. I was anticipating it. I was so happy that I got to see Accept for the first time and blew me away. I felt fortunate, like I won the lottery. Here they are. They're finally here for me. It was great.
What year?
Yeah, same tour, Russian Roulette. I didn't get to them. I didn't get to them on this album for some reason. Maybe availability in the States. I don't remember.
Oh wow, that's a dream tour for me. Open with TV Wars.
Yeah. And the live album that came out, was that between this and Russian Roulette?
Yeah.
Kazuku Ban.
Yeah.
It's a great album as well.
Yeah. Wow. Great to hearing that. Wow. Thank you.
See that? Johan is leaving tonight's show happy. Johan has flipped the script on us. We thought that Johan was gonna complain about the order of some of these bands, and Johan is going to sleep happy tonight. So cool. We haven't had too many debut albums on here, but this is probably one of the biggest debut albums to come out this year. It's been reissued a lot. It's had a lot of different album covers. It is Megadeth with Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. It is definitely not one of my favorite Megadeth albums. Didn't make my list, but I know that a lot of people really like this album. So anybody want to discuss this one?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Johan.
Yeah. It's not a good thing that this album came before Rush Power Windows. It's it's a bad thing. So I mean, it's not a bad album, but I know you guys who are looking at me right now in my computer perhaps are looking down a little bit because
Back to
Power
normal.
Windows is a much better album. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, I bought this album blind. Like I'd never heard them before. It had just come out, and I read the review in Kerrang, and it got like a 5K review. And the photograph, I still remember it was Dave Mustaine pointing a gun to the camera, and it was just like somewhere in the review was like, yeah, this guy used to be in Metallica. So it was like, yeah, that's all I need to hear. Bought it like the next weekend, took it home, and I remember putting on the first song, Love to Death, and it was just like, what is this? It's got a really odd time signature.
Right.
That song. Like it took me years to get used to that song.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, once I got past that song, I loved it. Like the Killers, the title track was a lot more accessible.
Right.
You know, it was the thrash heyday. You know, I think I loved it, and I really did love Megadeth from that point onwards until probably the last thing I bought by them was the Holy Wars single.
Okay.
And then they were gone. They were for other people. But yeah, this album, I love it. You know.
Anthony, didn't you like Holy War single?
No, I did. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
I did.
you did like it. Yeah.
But I never bought the album.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace. Yeah. I think I bought it since. I have it now, but you know, at the time.
I think my biggest thing with this album is that the first thing that I heard from them was Peace Sells. And that's so polished, so succinct, just how they did that, how the album was recorded and everything. And then you go back and you listen to this album. And it's interesting because there are a lot of bands that I've listened to over the years where the first album is really raw, is really the production isn't there. And you're like, wow, that's kind of like what makes it special. And with this album, and it could be that, you know, the first time that I heard it was one of the reissues, and they've reissued this so many times because they've fucked it up so many times.
Yeah.
That's what I think the problem is that when they've wanted to go in and improve it, they've made it worse with some of these songs, you know? So I think that's probably led me to it being one of my least listened to albums by the band because of that, because they've dicked around with the album too much.
They dicked around with it too much, and Victor's nailing it. Yeah, because then they re-recorded it, and it sounds great production-wise, but then Dave gets he feels bad about some lyrics, and he goes and changes it back, I think, on These Boots. What the hell, Dave? Leave it alone. It was just fine. But, you know, if I need to pick me up, I need a thrash album that sounds raw, this is probably the one. The album cover, I think, is awful. But if I need to get angry and fill up and all that, rattle your goddamn head. That rattle head is so good. Crank it up loud every time. I love it.
I actually love the album cover. The version that they've changed the album cover to is awful.
It's awful too.
Yeah,
well, okay.
Yeah. But this album cover, like this strange album cover, which is kind of scary, you know, and then you've got that first song, which is weird and bizarre. It was like this album, it felt dangerous at the time.
Right.
Dangerous, exactly. All right, well, we can agree to disagree on the album cover. Both of them suck, in my opinion.
No, there's three. There's three versions of this album cover.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
They can't even keep that the same, huh, Victor?
Let me see if I can pull this up. There's three different because they've re-released the damn thing so many times.
Dave likes to change lyrics. Dave likes to tweak, but he hasn't nailed it each time.
Oh, and
but he knows that the album, some of the songs are good enough.
He's fucked with the. Yeah, I can't find the second cover. Wikipedia doesn't have it, and I just did a quick.
That's all right.
Google search, but there is a second variation. Like the newer one has like a rattlehead with the crossbones behind and like the sickles, it looks like. Well, there's one where it's as if it wasn't a completed version of that. So it's just the head and like one crossbone. So something along those lines. It's a little different.
Maybe they didn't pay the designer.
Maybe they didn't pay the designer. There you go. Holy shit. Seriously. And that was the label, wasn't it? The label didn't pay the guy. I mean, it's Universal, I think. Just maddening.
It seems a bit shoddy on all sides actually, but you
Yeah,
know, the guy did the work.
You're the man. All right, number 4 was my introduction to this band. What are you gonna say, Dan?
It's gonna be. Ah, shit! I lost it. It's not gonna be Ingve. It's gonna be Dokken. Yeah!
Fucking- holy shit! Oh man. So every year when we'd come over to Spain, we'd kind of bug my parents to give us money to go to the local mall or shopping center to get an album that we could listen to on the 7-hour flight over, and then the subsequent 9 hours of sitting in fucking Madrid before getting the connecting flight. But anyway, and one year, after seeing the It's Not Love video, with seeing them on the back of a flatbed truck driving around LA, not knowing that the Rolling Stones had done this in the 60s, thinking, holy shit, why don't more bands do this? Why can't I have a fucking band driving down the middle of my town doing this? This is so cool. Not realizing how dangerous that actually is and everything else. But hey, you're young and stupid and want to see bands. Anyway, so I got Under Lock and Key, and I listened to this album over and over and over again. It was, because it was the only Dokken album that I had, it was my favorite for a long time. And it was I'll always remember it. When you opened up a new cassette in the States, the way that these cassettes were printed, they had a weird smell when you opened them, and they would maintain the smell. And this was the first cassette that I got that had that weird smell, because it was like a booklet where you could keep unfolding, and it would end up being this huge thing that was like double-sided 6 panels with lyrics and thank you notes and this and that. And instead of doing homework, I'd be sitting there reading and seeing if I could catch the member of another band's name in the thank yous. But
you nailed it.
This album, it's got a lot of good stuff on it. Of course, when you go back and you revisit things like Tooth and Nail, when the album after this, I think, is much superior to this one as well. It's a good album for that time period. It's got some good stuff, but it's also got some fucking shit ass ballads on here that they were trying to recreate Alone Again like 3 times. I don't remember. There's 2 or 3 ballads on here, and it drove me nuts. They were always the songs that I fast forwarded. Sorry, never been a ballad guy. But again, good album for the time, but not their best. Anyone else? Under Lock and Key, Dokken.
Sure. It's a very US vote. I think this album is were not a big thing in Europe. Not at least that. I mean, if you compare this one to Halloween, Walls of Jericho, Halloween had a much more impact than this album. But this album is great, and I love the songs on it. But to me, that higher position on the list is not perhaps correct. So
there's 2 things. One, Anthony hit on before. Dokken opened up for a lot of big bands in this time period. They opened up for Judas Priest. They opened up for may have been Maiden or Ozzy or somebody like that. So a lot of people got to see them. In My Dreams was everywhere when they released that single. So that was a big deal. Halloween did not exist in the US at this time.
No.
Walls of Jericho, and this is what happened with Halloween in the States. Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2 came out. Then Keeper of the Seven Keys 1, Walls of Jericho, and the EP. And at the same time, they released The Best, the Rare, the Raw. So they released all of those albums at the same time because the I Want Out video started getting played on MTV. And then they got on a big MTV tour, which was Anthrax, Halloween, and Exodus. Then the rest of the Halloween albums came out. So that's why the Halloween stuff isn't as high. And I voted for the Halloween. The Dokken album was really big. I mean, it wasn't huge, but it got its play. And the two songs that I've mentioned, It's Not Love and The Hunter. It's Not Love and
Hunter.
yeah. And In My Dreams. I'm trying to think what the first song is off of that.
Unchain the Night.
Unchain the
Night got radio play as well. So they were. The other thing too is Dokken was managed by the same people that managed Metallica at that time. So they were working them quite a bit. There's talk. They've always talked about it that had they've listened to their management and they would have stayed together, that they would have had the potential to be one of the biggest bands from that period, but they don't want to listen. So instead they listened to the label and wore those goofy costumes on the album cover.
I like that the first thing you went to is the music video for shooting that in LA and Hollywood, which takes me back every time I see it because that's sort of home to me. And looking at that, I remember all that going on. That was LA. That was Los Angeles. 85.
Yeah, the other thing for me too is that Dokken is a band because of this album that I've listened to a lot more than a lot of the other bands that became bigger than them. I mean, aside from me always being somebody that's kind of pulled for the underdog and stuff like that, the music George Lynch is playing has always spoken to me more than a lot of the other quote unquote big time players. Unfortunately, George doesn't know how to release one quality album a year instead of 78 albums a year now, but that's another story. All right. Number 3. I've been spelling it wrong all of these years, and I noticed that two people that are with us here, Jeremy and Johan, were spelling it correctly because although these guys are from LA, they spell it the British way. Theater of Pain, Motley Crue. All right. So for me, I mentioned the whole story about getting a cassette before coming over. Theater of Pain, I remember in 85 when this came out, I made my uncle drive to every record shop here in Spain until we found this fucking thing on cassette. And then I drove him absolutely nuts with this because he didn't like rock at all. And he was listening to Theater of Pain for hours on end.
Poor guy.
It's funny because this album, listening to it back, similar to what Dan said, it holds a special place for me. It was the first Motley Crue album that I owned, and I went back and got other stuff after this. And I remember the band always said that they never liked this album, that they didn't like it. And as a kid, I was like, I love this album. What do you mean you don't like it? I love it. And then listening back to it now, I'm like, well, there is a few clunkers on here, and there are some, I was listening to, and there were some songs that I fast forwarded. I still remember to this day buying a cowbell on purpose so that I could play City Boy Blues off of this as a kid. So the album will always have, again, a special place for me. This was my number one album because when I went back, and it wasn't my number one, but I kept deliberating and I looked at it. I was looking at it and I said, I know the lyrics to every single one of these songs. What I had is number one. I'm like, there's songs off here that I don't remember. There are songs off here that I play a lot more now than I did then. But this Motley Crue album, if I'm looking at it as if I was voting in 85, it would definitely be my number one. And I was like, you know what? It's got to be my number one. So that's why it ended up for me being number one. My number two ended up being number two, and it only got one vote different. So we'll get to that in a second. But anyone else want to talk about Theater of Pain?
I would say that this album keeps the theme going of highly anticipated albums from this year that didn't live up to. This is, I remember at the time, sort of, convincing myself that I liked this album.
Right.
And, playing Smoke in the Boys' Room and going, yeah, it's all right, but and you could almost throw The Last Command in with that as well, although there's some great tunes on that. So, whereas 85 was a fantastic year for music, it also had a lot of letdowns from the big boys, you know what I mean?
Right. Understood, yeah. Johan, you want to say anything about Theater of Pain?
Yeah, I think I agree with Anthony. It has its really highs and really lows. So, but remembering, Shout at the Devil was one of my biggest albums in my life. It is still, and when it came out, Theater of Pain, when it came out, it was almost like a magical moment. And then when I heard City Boy Blues, I was, it was so bad.
I love that song. Oh no.
Yeah, but
Johan.
it was something else. So
Yeah, totally.
but then it changed, and then now I mean, after reading Nicky Six, the Heroin Diaries and all that, I mean, this album is fantastic. It's a mark of the 85. It's perhaps not the best album ever made, but it's something that's it's that was the time. That was 1985. So it's, wow, what an album. I mean, Home Sweet Home. Perhaps you have heard that song a little bit too much, but wow. They made that song, and that's not a good, that's not a bad thing. It's, wow, it's great.
Yeah, in 85, I was listening to, Leather Wolf, Black and Blue, Rough Cut, and Raven and stuff. So this album came in and it didn't hold up, kind of like you said with as Twisted Sister. But I already knew about Smoking in the Boys' Room. I listened to that when I was a kid, the original version. And I always loved that version. I always loved that song. I always thought how cool it was and what it was singing about. And it was perfect. And then Motley did it, and it didn't live up to my ears of what I knew from Brownsville Station, and it didn't sound right. They didn't do it right in my head, and I don't know if Motley's ever admitted to that or feel the same, but to me, it wasn't covered right. It should have been better.
Yeah, the original is great.
Yeah.
Now Nicky's latest thing is he's now saying that he doesn't know if he played on the first 4 albums or not, and he's blaming the producer. And I'm thinking, yeah, that probably has more to do with you being fucked up than it does with the producer including your playing or not. So that's another conversation. So the most functional drug addict ever doesn't know he can remember every fine detail of everything while he was supposedly strung out in the back of a closet, but now he doesn't remember if that's his playing or not. So, all right.
Somebody's marketing for attention.
Yeah, well, you can count on it anytime that they're promoting anything. Oh yeah, new tour, supposedly new album as well. So new album, which John 5 probably had written before he even joined the band, but that's another story. Jeremy, anything you want to say about Theater of Pain?
Yeah, I'm more in your camp. I mean, I think it's a really great album. It was my introduction to Motley Crue, to be honest, and I was really up for this album when it came out. I thought "Smoking in the Boys' Room" was one of the greatest songs I'd heard in that year, and I really, really enjoyed it. I played it all the time. I just thought it had this great blues vibe to it, and it was they look great, Motley Crue, and I agree with Johan about Home Sweet Home. I think that's a fantastic ballad. I've seen that live as well. Been sort of standing right next to the band, and they came out to the middle in the Manchester Arena, and they played on a little sort of pod thing in the middle, and I was right next to them as they played it. And it's just a great song to listen to. But I like a lot of the songs on that album. I think it's really good. It's still one of my favorite Motley Crue albums. It's still probably one of my favorite albums of the year. I agree probably with Anthony that it's not the greatest year for metal and rock, and he's right that there's a lot of albums that are not up to scratch in this particular year. But I will play that album again and again. I love it. I think it's great.
Cool. Yeah, I think for me, I mean, the deeper cuts are probably the best parts of the album. And I think Home Sweet Home was just monumental for them. And who wasn't a kid watching that video and seeing certain things, and which are obviously not PC nowadays, but yeah, I'm not going to get myself in trouble.
The video, you hit on it, because you'd go to a concert and we didn't always have live releases of concerts after the fact. So you watching the video and you go, that's the experience of the tour.
Yeah,
and it kind of summarizes it all up. And the whole get on the bus and get on a tour and go do the city to city. I love those videos, and it shows a period in time, and you're watching what happened at your city and looking for it. It's a great music video, and looking in the crowd with the girls and guys, whatever, and it's great. That part's solid, but that's that. I don't know where I'm going. You go.
Moving on.
Number 2.
1 point difference for number 2. As I was tallying points, I'm like, wow, this album is going to be close to the top. Will it be the top? Before the number 1 just eked it out. But number 2. Anthrax, Spreading the Disease.
Yeah. Well.
This was my number 1 for the longest time. And Anthrax is one of my all-time favorite bands in 2023, and they have been for a long time. I mentioned this before. They were my number 1, but then there's songs off of this that I didn't remember. But I didn't remember them not because the songs suck, but because I think that this album has some huge fucking songs on it. I mean, AIR is tremendous. Lone Justice is another favorite of mine. Madhouse, Stand or Fall. The Enemy and Aftershock, I didn't remember them from the song title, but then when I listened to them, I'm like, okay, I remember these songs. But Armed and Dangerous, Medusa, and Gung Ho, because they were from my area, those 3 songs plus Madhouse got played a lot on the radio, on metal radio. And specifically Eddie Trunk. Eddie Trunk played the crap out of Anthrax. And it made you feel that, I had no idea of, who was East Coast, who was West Coast, who was this or that. He had the guys from Anthrax on his show all the time. So it made you feel like, oh, these are our boys. And when it was, when I got to a certain age and it was like, oh, well, you either like Metallica and Slayer or you like Megadeth and Anthrax. I was like, okay, then I like Anthrax and Megadeth. So that was kind of me going down that road. Spreading the Disease was unfortunately, it was the second album I'd heard from them. I heard State of Euphoria first, but this album has left a huge imprint in this household because thanks to my youngest son, AIR has been played like 600 times on Apple Music.
Good. That's great.
Because there was a point in time where he would just play the song on repeat. And my oldest son has the Spreading the Disease cassette, has my cassette up in his room. He's got the CD up in his room. And on a few occasions, you ask him, what's your favorite band?
Good.
And he'll say, I think it's Anthrax. Is that okay? I'm like, yeah, that's more than okay.
That's a deep cut. AIRs, they don't always play that, and good. That's awesome.
The two of them love that song.
Fuck yeah, me too.
So there was a point in time in this house where all you heard was AIR, No One Knows by Queens of the Stone Age, and Seventh Son of the Seventh Son by Iron Maiden. Over and over again. Those three songs. I'm not talking about the full Maiden album. Just the song. Over and over and over again. So anyone else want to mention something about Spreading the Disease?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great album. Like you've got like the likes of this and Killings of Business coming out, and then you had these. I don't want to keep going on about it, but these letdowns from the bands you would have been listening to maybe 2-3 years earlier. It was there was a sense of change in the air.
Could it be that these bands were hungry when the other ones were just trying to maintain themselves, or just
yeah, it could have been
to go with the flow,
It's just the passage of time,
Yeah.
And it wasn't far after this that you're talking 90s, so another change again.
Yeah. It's interesting to me because again, I got into the band State of Euphoria. I've always felt that Spreading the Disease was more important than Among the Living, because I think that Spreading the Disease kind of set the blueprint. I realized that for a lot of people, Among the Living was their introduction. So songs like Indians and Caught in a Mosh and stuff like that. But I think that this album is a lot more solid as well. Like I said, there's only like 2 songs that I don't really listen to frequently off of this. Off of Among the Living, there's more that I don't listen to.
Yeah, maybe this is an album they should tour.
Oh, yeah. Deep cut, though. But you said it.
Like, wouldn't that be great?
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't know this album so much in '85. I discovered it after. But I know that once I did listen to it, I was like, what have I been missing out on? Maybe it was my first one. I don't remember. But when I discovered this, and I can go back to this album at any time and listen to it and get all hyped up all over again. And you can go from 1 through 10 or whatever the songs are. And it's like, oh, what was that one? Oh, there's that. Yeah. And it just hits every time.
Yeah.
I'm singing along. Yeah. Armed and Dangerous, you sing along too.
Absolutely. Armed and Dangerous. It was all of these songs that I'm mentioning that Eddie Trunk played. This was just to set the stage. his show either would start at 11 or at midnight, and you'd be hearing these songs with a lot of other like classic songs that were deeper cuts. You know, it was way before he transitioned into just playing the same old all the time, which sucks
Well,
because you know the potential is there. So you know the potential is there to hear Armed and Dangerous or Medusa or Gung Ho, but instead you're getting Antisocial every
yeah,
single show.
to hear Medusa be like legend, the unique. But yeah, he probably had more control over what he could play then versus now. But
Right.
imagine hearing Medusa on the radio. That'd be great.
There's some show that they did where he was introing them, and he's told this story a bunch of times, where he says to them, I know you guys are playing Medusa for me tonight, right? Because it's my favorite song by you guys. And they say to him, we haven't played that song in like 15 years and we don't know how to play it. So
We've ignored it. We've moved on. We're
Yeah.
not going to listen to the fans on that. Yeah.
I saw an exchange, or at least somebody mentioned it to Charlie on Twitter or Instagram, and a lot of people liked it. He didn't respond, but it was something to the effect of, this 40th anniversary DVD compilation is really cool, but you guys have been kind of playing these same songs for the last 20 years. You guys have a great deep catalog. Do your fans some service and play some other songs. So sucks, but is what it is. All right. Anyone else want to mention something about this album before we move on to number one? All right. So let's do the 10 again here, and we'll move on to one. At 10, AC/DC, Fly on the Wall. 9, Bon Jovi, 7,800 Degrees Fahrenheit. 8, The Cult with Love. 7, Dio, Sacred Heart. From Sacred Heart to Metal Heart. From Accept at 6. Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good by Megadeth at 5. Under Lock and Key, Dokken, 4. Motley Crue, Theater of Pain. Number 3. Number 2, Anthrax, Spreading the Disease. At number 1, I did not expect this, but I'm pleased because this was an album that I got out of my local library. They had it. I recorded it on cassette. They had it on vinyl, and I played the crap out of this album. There's tremendous riffs on this album. Dan, can you guess what album is at number 1?
Well, I'm going to say it's not Maiden Live in 85 because it couldn't make my list. And it's not Yngwie, and it's not Raven, so no. But it's Scorpions or something? Go ahead.
Johan?
My guess is Rat.
Yeah.
Rat.
Oh, the album
Invasion of Your Privacy for Jeremy, and for Anthony, Invasion of Your Privacy. Just this album. It's funny because I know that there are people that have soured on this album over the years. And they'll always go towards, Out of the Cellar was so much better than this. Out of the Cellar, great debut album. Obviously, as they say with a lot of bands, 18 years to write an album, 6 years to write 6 months to write a follow-up. Invasion of Your Privacy just has some huge songs on this. Guitar playing wise, to the point where I don't think that they've ever come close afterwards to the magnitude of the first two albums. This is almost the same as Too Fast for Love, Shout at the Devil with Motley Crue to me, with Out of the Cellar and with Invasion of Your Privacy. This album was obviously produced differently than the first one, but I mean, there's a lot of songs off of this that got played on regular radio, where at that time Motley Crue didn't have that. That's the other interesting thing is that Motley Crue, for example, at least for us on the East Coast, Smoking in the Boys Room got on the radio, Home Sweet Home got on the radio. But Look That Kill or stuff off of the first 2 albums were never played on the radio. Rat was always on the radio since they broke. I mean, when we voted for 84, Round and Round was the song that most people voted for. But off of this album, the big hits were You're in Love, Lay It Down. And I'm trying to think if they're
Closer to My Heart.
Closer to My Heart. Well, I mean, the deep cuts are ridiculous off of this.
Dangerous but worth the risk.
Yeah. Never Use Love, Give It All, Between the Eyes, What You Give Is What You Get. Got Me on the Line is another one. I mean, this album has songs where I'll listen to it right now just by saying What You Give Is What You Get. I've got the chorus in my head and it's going to be stuck in my head for the next few days. So, Invasion of Your Privacy. Johan, you guessed it. So, what's your opinion on this album?
Oh, I bought this one when it came out, and I thought, and I think I bought it because of the cover.
Okay.
Yeah, you did.
Because the model.
Nothing wrong with
I don't
that.
know why. I don't know why, but
We know why. There's nothing wrong with that.
yeah,
We all did.
yeah, and
It's okay.
I mean, to me, that is and was a fantastic album, and every song is a hit.
Mhm.
At least in the, if you compare it to the 1985. But I mean, wow, what an album! It's I'm excited to hear. Rat were never big. They were big in here in Sweden, but they never played here.
Okay.
So if they played in other parts of Europe and US, I'm excited to hear if they were bigger, but not here. They were not, no. It was a band that you had on your record and in the magazines, but not in the real life, if you know what I mean.
Gotcha. Okay. Jeremy, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, this in some ways this surprises me. It's number one, and in other ways it doesn't, because I think Rat are a band that sort of epitomised the mid '80s. They're the sound of the mid '80s, aren't they? And they had that sort of unique sound because of the vocal. I mean, this was an album that I think I bought, and I think I got it on cassette actually at the time. So I got the first few albums. They had a song or two on a film, which I think was quite popular over here and sort of made them big as well. And obviously they were on MTV and you know, they were just part and parcel of that hair metal era. Was I really into them? I could never be certain that I was massively into them or not. I think it was the vocal that I was trying to get to win, you know, I was trying to get them to win me over with, but the songs I really liked. And I think that's what you sort of picked up on, that, you know, they've got some great songs on those early albums. So, you know, they are certainly worthy of the top 10. Whether they're worthy of number one, I mean, that's just what we've picked between us. So, you know, that's fine. They are number one. But yeah, they've certainly got a real. They're really part of that era. And if you had to pick sort of 3 or 4 bands of the hair metal of the mid '80s, they're you know, they're on the tip of your tongue, aren't they?
Yeah, I think that's a really fair assessment. I mentioned this before about Dokken. I was always a bigger Dokken fan, but I get why people love this band. You know, I wasn't too, as I mentioned, I wasn't. To me, the transition of the Letdown album was the one after this, which was the one that I never got why people love that third and fourth album. I don't like them at all. Especially the radio hits. I thought the radio hits were terrible off of those 2 albums. But anyway, Anthony, what's your opinion on Invasion of Your Privacy?
I remember liking it a lot at the time.
Mhm.
They were a band that I don't think they played Europe until they played Donington. Was it 86? I think maybe 87. So they were always uh, sort of playing catch up over here because they never played here. But yeah, this is a good album. I do think Dancing on the Cover is good as well. Not so much Reach for the Sky. In fact, it's pretty terrible. But
Yeah.
yeah, and Jeremy's right. Like when you think of 80s metal, a few years ago, people might have said Motley Crue, but as time goes on, like Rat pretty much sum it up, don't they? I think they got a little more staying power than Motley Crue, and they probably will be better off never reforming. And probably never doing another album would be the right thing to do for them.
Right. I think their last album wasn't bad, but it's similar to what we've talked about with other bands. It just doesn't have that special ingredient that, for example, this album had. And I mean, again, for a lot of bands, we've talked ad nauseum with Def Leppard about this. You lose that one big component. Rat lost Robin Crosby, and they lost the glue that kind of kept everything together, and they lost one of the biggest songwriters that they had. I mean, once he was gone, that self-titled album that they released in the 90s is, I don't even know what that is. It's terrible. Reach for the Sky sounds like Invasion of Your Privacy at that point. I mean, it was so bad. The last album wasn't bad. Infestation I thought was for a band from that era putting out new music 30, 40 years later, was a good album. Was it as good as some of these other albums we're talking about? No, but it was still a solid album.
Commercially, this is a big album for Rat. It did really well.
Yeah.
I saw them in they played the arenas here in the U.S.
Mhm.
and they played them up and down. And I don't know if I saw them more than once, but I do remember going, and they couldn't have been hotter. And that was in the moment. It was magic. I'd like to do it all over again. With the videos for this too, it shows the live action from the show, that I went to, and there it is. It's the exact same thing. So the video hits and it helps you remember the song even more.
But it's not surprising that it did end up at number one, because it's an album that I think a lot of people like.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? So therefore,
Yeah.
it would have gotten a lot of votes. It probably got like a load of fives, So that's kind of funny how something which is good but not great ends up winning, if you know what I mean.
Well, just to give you an idea, let's see. 5.
Well said.
All right, not on that list.
I didn't put it in my top 10 because I needed to give respect to other things, and appreciative that Weird Al made our list.
Number 10. Not on that list.
Yeah, not on mine.
Number 4. What do you mean, Dan? You have it at number 1.
But I do recognize the album. It was a big album. I think the problem for me is I've played it too many times. I wore it out, and it just doesn't. It's not there for me anymore.
Well, that was the thing with me with the Motley Crue album. I'm like, I'm so down on this band now that can I really put them there? And then after looking at it objectively, I'm like, man, I love these songs, even though they're pieces of shit as people. I've listened to this album so much. I cannot not have it at 1. Let's see. So at 8 on somebody else's list, a 6, a 7, a 3, a 4, and a 5. So
Yeah.
so it made it on almost everybody's list. So it's similar to what Anthony said. It and it didn't make number 1 by much. There's a 7-point difference between that and the Anthrax. Between the Anthrax and Motley Crue, there's 1 point. Between Motley Crue and Dokken, there's 1 point. Between Dokken and Megadeth, there's 3. Between Megadeth and Accept, there's 2 points. And then after that, Dio drops down 7. But then from Dio to the Cult, there's 2. From the Cult to Bon Jovi, there's 3. And between Bon Jovi and AC/DC, there's 1 point. So the top 10 is made up of basically 2 big groups that aren't separated all that much. So, I mean, you look at it that way. There's a lot of music that were very we're voted on very close to one another, because I think a lot of the music, a lot of people coincided on a lot of these albums. So I think that's what ended up happening. And that's what happens. It's the difference between, as we've mentioned it a bunch of times, where, there's 1 or 2 albums that are number 1, but they only get 1 vote. So they don't go any higher. That's why I wish we'd be able to get, we got good participation out of this. I think 12 people voted, 12 out of 18 possible votes. So that's not
bad.
Yeah. The thing is, too, with that, is that a lot of these votes, Johan mentioned, it's skewed towards an American vote, because most of the people are in the States. So that comes through with a lot of this voting here.
You need to give Johan's vote double points, maybe, to just even up the odds a little bit.
Yeah.
He gets to vote twice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
It's okay.
Good.
And mine too.
Okay.
Cool. In any event, I want to thank everyone who's joined us on this awesome panel. Jeremy, Dan, Johan, Anthony. We did have Ed for a while there. Also within the chat, we had Bill Elam and we had Tony, which is awesome. I want to thank anyone who's listening or watching the replay of this. Thank you. I always say this, it means the world to me. It really does. These shows wouldn't happen without all of you guys participating, and it's awesome. Share this with people, let them know. And as I mentioned today, the good old folks at Patreon are now offering free subscriptions for a whole week. So if you want to jump on for a week and try it out, you're more than welcome to do so. On that note, we wrap tonight's show, the 1985 special, and we'll be back next month with another patron special. We have to decide on that one. We'll see where we go with that. And that is all, folks. Thank you so much once again, and we'll see you next time right here on Signals from Mars. See ya.
Thank you for watching the Signals from Mars live stream. You can watch the show live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch, or check out replays on YouTube. Go to signalsfrommars.com for more information. This concludes our show.